All right, back here on Is It Prophecy, also simulcasted as Messiah Hour. You can check us out at messiahhour.blogspot.co.il. Posted some recent episodes of Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi, also Rabbi Sharga Simmons, the founder of Honest Reporting. Check out those episodes as well. On the line right now, frequent contributor to the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, and Arut Sheva, also a frequent speaker at the synagogues around Jerusalem, also Sher Chadash, frequent speaker as well. So please welcome Ze'ev Ben Yechiel. Ze'ev, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ari. It's good to be on here. If by frequent speaker you mean that I just talk a lot, then that's true. But I do gotta get up there and pound the pulpit a little more. That's
right. Well, you're certainly a well-known speaker in town and a well-known writer, and you have a lot of thoughts about the political situation. What I want to throw out to you first is a lot of people are upset at the government, Israeli government, for how they've handled the war in Gaza for a lot of different areas, and a lot of people are upset at the government in general. And you said something interesting to me off-air a while ago, that even if we're not so happy with the government, this is still the process of the coming of Mashiach. So if you can just elaborate a little more about that.
Well, I think right now the government is in a state of crisis management, of basically continuous crisis management. We're not the ones calling the shots. Hamas is calling the shots. The Arabs are calling the shots. The world is still calling the shots, but we are in our own country. We have our own government. And I think there will come a process in which we will no longer be the reactors and we will be the proactors, the proactive party that is actually making the decisions that's going to lead the world to redemption. But at the moment, at least on the surface, we still have to deal with the cards that Hashem deals with us in terms of the way that He's arranging the forces in the world, the way that history is playing out, and the way that we have to react to it just in order to survive. And in our government, we're still sort of in a situation. We're surrounded by enemies. We're a very tiny country. I just read an article yesterday about 20 high-tech inventions that ended up making their way into that originated in the high tech because we have to constantly scramble to innovate in order to be able to defend ourselves. And that's how it was reminiscent for me. Or Santiago and the things we had to do in order to arm ourselves, cobble together sticks and stones, basically, and trying to make some kind of makeshift weapons that we could fight back against the Nazis with. And I feel like we're kind of in the same situation, and now we have to scramble all the time just to be able to survive. And I feel like, well, if we were to follow the Torah, where we see this week's parsha, last week's parsha, it says, "V'yashaptem v'horashtem v'yashaptem." All right, so that means you drive the enemies out, horashtem v'yashaptem, and you settle the land. So we have a mitzvah to drive the nations out of this land. And actually, it explains that it's not just the 7 Canaanite nations, because by the 7 Canaanite nations, it says another pasuk that we're supposed to kill them all. Here it says horashtem, to drive out. So it actually refers to all of the nations, because we already have the word haragtem, or something similar, applying to all of applying to the 7 Canaanite nations. So in any case, we have a mitzvah to drive out all the nations, or all members of nations that don't subject to our authority as ger pashav. So on the one hand, we have the physical power to do it. We have a state and that is strong enough and competent enough to be able to make decisive moves. But right now, psychologically, we're still in a state of crisis management. I mentioned before, the crisis management, it's not necessarily by necessity, right? So we've come back from 2,000 years of exile, and we're still living in a mental reality in which we don't call the shots, in which we are not. So I think when we begin to take on ourselves the role of leader, and we understand that we're the light among the nations, not the whipping boy, then we're not going to need to be scrambling to make these little inventions and coping strategies, coping mechanisms to deal with the forces that are constantly at our door, and we'll actually be able to, we'll no longer be the blamed party, but we're going to actually be able to take the offensive. You know, I think we saw a little bit of that in the last Gaza war. One thing that did impress me was the strength of the Hezbollah effort. Now, usually I'm pretty skeptical about Hezbollah for several reasons. One is that it puts us in a defensive position, and we have to explain our right to exist and our right to defend ourselves. You know, when we are trying to justify our actions, in a sense, it does kind of reinforce the accusation, because it's on a psychological level. If you understand human psychology, you know that when you're trying to defend yourself, you're in a way confirming, strengthening the sense from the other party that you have something to defend against.
Yeah, that is a great point. That is certainly a great point. That it's kind of the situation where when someone's guilty, they give a long answer, and when someone's innocent, they give a short answer. So I think that is a certainly interesting point that perhaps we're explaining ourselves a bit too much. But one of the things I wanted to talk about with you is because I look at you as one of these old school Zionists, an old school religious Zionist, a belief that Jews should live here. And there's a prayer that's read on Shabbat in many synagogues that's saying that this state is the beginning of the redemption, that is the flower of Mashiach coming. And in some synagogues, they don't read that prayer because they think that the state reverses things. The state pushes off Mashiach. So I wanted to know if you could comment on that aspect.
Perspective of history and of our moment in history, it's possible to look at what's happened in the last few generations and to say that it's pushing off Mashiach. It's very clear when you look at the span of human history, where you have a boom and bust, if you will, of civilizations rising and falling, and of the material level of civilization rising and falling correspondingly. You see that today the world seems to have broken out of that boom and bust cycle, of that up and down, and we're basically in an exponential growth of technology and our ability to manipulate and understand the physical world. It almost seems like technological progress is running away from us. It's almost a force of its own that we can barely contain. And I think that the internet revolution, the general media revolution, the digital revolution are all signs that the world is waking up past the phase of world history. We're entering a phase where all of a sudden it seems like mankind is taking much more control of its destiny, and we're definitely heading towards something that was never clear before. And so I think just in looking at history in general, looking at the global picture, the narrative, of course, of how the state of Israel is founded from 2,000 years of exile and its horribly cataclysmic upheaval of our people, and the Holocaust and the chaos of World War II, to the creation of the state of Israel only a few years later. It's something that's never happened in history. Just the mere fact of a people managing to maintain their identity for 2,000 years, all over the world, coming and restoring and establishing a the fact there is after this devastating blow that wiped out a million people, there's something there that's beyond the physical. There's something there that can't just be explained, through historical forces. The very existence of the Jewish people after all of these centuries and millennia is in itself, I think, proof that there's something divine going on. Now, to say that the state of Israel happened without God's approval, that's just negating God's all possibility in the world, his omnipotence in the world. I mean, that's a negation of the Torah right there. Clearly, God is doing something, and whatever He does is bringing us closer to the Mashiach, right? Like they say in dating, right? Every girl that you go out with, If it's not the one, it's still bringing you closer. Every job that you get, if it's not the one that you're meant to have ultimately, it's still bringing you a step closer. So to say that it's pushing off Mashiach is absolutely ridiculous. Now, if you read the famous book Emma Means Simcha by he ended up dying in the Holocaust, and before he died, there's a book he wrote for decades. And he said, "Woe unto us!" And he realized what was happening to the Jewish people in Europe. He said, "Woe unto us! Heed the call of the Zionists. We didn't hear. We didn't rise up at the call of the trumpet when the secular Zionists tried to arouse the national spirit to come back to the homeland. We shunned them, and we ostracized them, and we told our followers, this is folly, this is a mistake, this is going to lead us to sin, and woe unto us that we did this, because had we had a state decades ago, we could have saved all of these millions." And that was, I'd never seen anything like this before anywhere. This was before I had much of a concept of the political tensions between, let's say, European Judaism and Zionism, but it blew my mind. All of a sudden it became crystal clear to me that, if anything, the Holocaust is a lesson that we can no longer live in the exile, that the Shalosh Shavuot, the 3 oaths, even if they hadn't been mere midrash and had no halachic binding power whatsoever, which they don't, even if it was halachic, then clearly the 3 oaths have passed, and aside from that, the Holocaust is a very, very clearly, painfully.
Now, Zev, if you can talk about the 3 oaths, because this is a very famous concept. Those that oppose the state of Israel, Torah Karta, for example, the extreme elements, they quote a midrash about 3 oaths that basically say the Jews are not allowed to return to Israel unless. So, if you could just explain to our audience what that means.
Sure. So the 3 oaths come in. I may be mistaken. I think it's in Second Sanhedrin. My knowledge of Gemara is pretty shameful. But the 3 oaths consist of, one, the Jewish people coming back as a wall. That's what it says, as a kachoma. The second of one of the other 2 is that we are not supposed to rebel against the nations in coming back. And the third is that the nations, in return, Hashem gives us promise that the nations won't oppress us too much. So as long as those 3 conditions hold, we should not, if we come back to the land like a wall, and if we rebel against the nations, then we shouldn't do it, right? So if we're going to do it, it can't be one of those 2 ways. And also have to actually break their oaths, or break God's oath if the nations oppressing us too much has to be broken. Now we see that all of these things have actually come to pass, where all of these 3 conditions have been abrogated. Number 1, we didn't come as a wall. We came as a trickle, started as a trickle, and it grew into a stream, it grew into a current. But even by the time that World War II rolled around, it was still not, we were not in a situation where all of a sudden we had millions of Jews busting down the door to get into Eretz Israel. Number 2, not rebelling against the nations. The United Nations, the first international, truly encompassing international body, the first thing that they ruled on was the right of the Jewish people to a homeland. This was the first time that I know of in history when a world community authorized the existence of a nation on a particular land. Because of not rebelling against the nations, then I'd like to see that. Number 3, the Goyim won't oppress us too much. Well, I think if there's a better example of being oppressed too much than the Holocaust, then I would like to. It's very clear, Ari. It's very clear that anyone who not willingly blinding themselves that there is something going on here that's very good, it's very blessed, and there's no way, shape, or form violating these three oaths or the Torah in general by.
All right, again, speaking with Ze'ev Ben Yechiel here on Is It Prophecy on Israel National Radio, and just to elaborate a little more on that point regarding the three oaths, if that is such a halakha thing, it's not actually, but you could say Israel, the state, was created in 1948, 3 years after the Holocaust, so maybe that shows you that oath was then finally broken in its most form you can imagine. Now, we have Israel. Now, I want to continue with this galut mentality because we are in Israel, which is a geulah, but there's a lot of times a galut mentality, and we heard an interesting talk about a week ago regarding a Holocaust story where a Jew died on Kiddush Hashem, which happened millions of times, obviously the Holocaust, but you would kind of like to see other stories told because there are a lot of Holocaust stories that are told where the Jews fought for their religion and caused Nazis to die. So I wanted to know if, as Patton said, make the other guy die for your country, make the Nazi die for the Torah. So talk about that.
I think Patton was definitely onto something. I think it's a lesson that the Jews need to take to heart. I have yet to hear a single Holocaust story by a rabbi that didn't involve a Jew sacrificing himself to keep the Torah in some way or other, either sacrificing his life or his comfort, his physical survival, for the sake of keeping the Torah. Number one, there is a certain problem with that. Because there is a passage in the Torah that says, Sheyichyu behem. He talks about the mitzvot, says that you should live by them. There are only three cases where a Jew is supposed to give up his life to follow Torah. One is idol worship, the other one is unlawful sexual relations, and the third one is murder. So a lot of these stories don't have to do with one of these things. They're just stories about how a Jew maintains his religious observance in the face of this oppression. I've never heard a story that I can remember from a rabbi that talks about Jews physically fighting back for their existence, physically fighting the Nazis to show the world that we will not go silently into the night, as I think Churchill once said. Right. So when we ask ourselves, why did the world stay silent? How could it be that no one came to our aid? It's a known psychological phenomenon. If you yourself don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. Why did it take so long for these people that ISIS has been butchering? Why did it take so long for the world to mobilize? Why did it take so long for the world to do anything about Rwanda? And in the end, didn't really do anything for Rwanda because in all these cases, other parts of the world isn't thin to help the underdog unless the underdog fights back. This is actually one of the reasons that I believe why the world is silent or willfully ignorant so long, willfully or otherwise, about the Holocaust and the Jews are getting slaughtered because we weren't doing our part to fight back properly. And there were cases we did. There were death camps that had revolts, and there were partisan groups in the forest. And of course, Defiance is a great movie that deals with that. But in general, when we look back at the Holocaust, if anything, we're perpetuating the way in which Holocaust education is carried out to this day, and perpetuating the concept that, in the sense that we are helpless. And that's the definition of the exile. When we feel that we're helpless on a personal and national level to change our circumstances and to direct our destiny, then we're still in very, very much mentally in the exile, in the galut.
There is, yes, no doubt about that. Again, this is a Prophecy here on Israel National Radio. Zev, I don't know if you have heard the story or not, but I want to bring it out to you. Apparently, we're going to switch gears, talk more about this current war we have. In Gaza, President Obama apparently did not allow missiles that were supposed to go to Israel for us to use in our defense. He blocked that, and I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on that issue, so tell us about that.
Where I read, it actually has not been entirely confirmed, but it definitely falls in line with the general perception today that the U.S. is no longer the ally of Israel that it used to be, and that there's a lot of discussion that we may need to shift gears a little bit and side with Asia, cultivate our relationship with the Asian countries, particularly China, and to a somewhat smaller extent India, although India is also growing. And this is actually something I've been saying for many years now, that we can't always count on America to be the stalwart benefactor of the State of Israel. No nation lasts forever, except for, of course, the Jewish nation. But in the meantime, we have to stay on our toes, and we have to adjust our alliances to meet the reality, to meet the needs and the conditions that exist in the world today. Obama doing what he's doing from his end doesn't really concern me so much. Rav Kook said that what happens among the nations around the world is the reflection of something that's happening from inside on Israel. This is in part of the writing is called War and Peace, part about how Israel is the heart of the nations, right? So any kind of defect or malady within Israel is going to have global repercussions, and also it's going to reflect back on us, boomerang back on us. So I'm not so concerned with what the other nations are doing. What I'm concerned about is what we have to learn from it. When the Arabs rise against us, with the fury that they do, what is it supposed to teach us? I think it's enough to say, oh, these people are evil, and we have to fight them because they're evil. If we really are to believe that we are the engine of history and that we are the nation very much as the leader, then everything is in our hands. And if we're being attacked on some level, in some way, then that should be a sign to us that there's something that's trying to tell us by using these people as a stick against us. And that we need, for instance, in this case with the Arabs, to maybe strengthen our emunah. This is what they do have. Their message is very genuine and powerful. I was reading something about ISIS yesterday that talked about their brutality, but also talked about how they were powerful. If I'm not mistaken, it might have been David Horowitz who wrote this piece. In any case, we talked about how their faith is genuine and strong, and this is something that I think we need to learn when we're being attacked or we have weapons withheld from us by other governments. Of course, the lessons aren't always clear. We don't always know exactly what the message is that God's trying to convey to us. We don't have prophecy, but we do need to start thinking about, well, what do we do in order to not just to deal with the situation, but to change it, because it's in our hands. We have the ability to direct history.
Okay, we're going to take a break. On the other side, part 2 of my conversation with Ze'ev Ben Yechiel. This is It Prophecy here on IsraelNationalRadio.com, simulcasted as Messiah Hour on messiahhour.blogspot.co.il.